Hello, it is Wednesday, June 30th. That means another edition of Taxes and Retirement Live. I am Andy Panko, owner of Tenant Financial. Last of June, last of the quarter. Not that that means anything, but it's Wednesday, so Taxes and Retirement Live. Yay. Tonight's topic will be Backdoor Roth IRA contributions, what they are, how to do them, what to look out for, and all of the exciting things to know around that. Let me do the dad jokes. Here we go. Give me a second. Okay, comments are working. Good. All right. Starting with, would anyone be interested in being my companion? Asking for a friend. Yeah. What's the difference between a poorly dressed man on a tricycle and a well-dressed man on a bicycle? Attire. A-T-T-I-R-E, or a space tire. And finally, I'm done being a people pleaser, if everyone's okay with that. Yeah, all right. Enough of that. Moving on. Disclosure/disclaimer before we get into it. This video is only general explanations and education. It is not specific tax, legal, or investment advice. Before considering acting on anything you see in this video, first consult with your tax, legal, or investment advisor, which I am not. I'm just some random fella here on Facebook talking about tonight, Backdoor Roth IRA contributions. Cool. All right, so I see people have got their comments here. So maybe it's good. Maybe you figured out how to get your name showing up again. Excellent. Backdoor Roth IRA contributions. So where do I start? I do have a slide for this, but maybe I just get right to my slides. Let me do that instead of chit-chat and wasting time. So I will pull up my screen share here. Just give me a moment. Let me do that. I'll do this. Swap. I will minimize that. And I will go to share screen. Okay. And we're going. Look at that. Like magic. So let's start with what a regular or normal Roth IRA contribution is. You can think about this as putting money into the Roth through the front door, if you will. That'll make more sense when we start talking about what a backdoor Roth IRA contribution is. So as you all presumably know, there's different flavors of IRA. IRA stands for Individual Retirement Account. Traditional IRA is one that you usually put money in and you can get a tax deferral on your contribution, and then the money in there isn't taxed while it grows. You're eventually taxed when you take the money out. Now, you can put in money without getting the tax deferral in those, in which case that portion of the money you take out down the road will not be taxed, because that'll be a return of your already taxed money that went in. But for Roth IRAs, the big sort of hook and benefit to them is that the money you put in is not eligible for any sort of tax deduction. So you put in after-tax money, but while the money's in there, it's not taxed as it's within the account and growing. And eventually when you take it out, it'll all be tax-free, assuming you meet the few conditions to make it a quote-unquote qualified distribution, or you can always take out the amount of your contributions at any time. I won't get into that. I've done separate videos on that and have slides and cheat sheets on Roth IRA withdrawal eligibility rules. So for now, we're just focused on how to get money into a Roth IRA. So the normal way, if you will, is you take money from a regular cash account like your bank, savings account, checking account, whatever, or regular brokerage account. The point is, these aren't quote unquote qualified accounts. They're not tax deferred, they're not Roth, they're just normal assets, normal accounts. You take money from them. It's money you already pay tax on. Think about all money that's in your checking account, savings account, or regular brokerage account is all money that's been taxed somehow before it got there. So you take that money, put it into your Roth IRA. This is simply just a normal Roth IRA contribution. You can think about this as the front door, if you will. No one calls it a front door Roth IRA contribution, but in context of what a backdoor Roth IRA contribution is, which is what we're going to discuss, this you could think of as the front door. So this is a regular, normal Roth IRA contribution. But the problem is that there are income limits. Once your income is over a certain level, you can't directly put money into a Roth IRA, at least not directly, not through the front door. So let's talk about that. Here are it's modified adjusted gross income, or MAGI. here are the Maggie limits for 2021, income limits for 2021, that will, the areas at which you're eligible, not eligible, and then the phase out in between. So I didn't show married filing separate taxpayers. There's a slightly different here, different than what you see here. So I'll just stick to the most common ones: married filing jointly and single. So I'll explain what Maggie is, modified adjusted gross income. For now, let's just pay attention, excuse me, pay attention to these levels. So if you are married filing a joint return and you are combined, you know, the modified adjusted gross income shown on your tax return, well, it's not actually shown, but as calculated from your tax return, is below $198,000 for 2021, you are eligible, both you and your spouse are potentially eligible to contribute money directly into your respective Roth IRAs. If your modified adjusted gross income is equal to $198,000 but less than $208,000, then you get phased out. You can't do your full annual contribution limit, but it'll be something more than zero. I should have mentioned, sorry. So the actual contribution amounts, if you'll be under 50 by the end of this year, is a max of $6,000. If you're 50 or older by the end of the year, it's a max of $7,000. It's again, if you're married filing joint under $198,000 of modified adjusted gross income. Once you're 198 to 208, you're in this awkward sort of phase out range. It's basically linear. You go from, if you're at the top of the phase out of 208, your eligible contribution amount is zero. If you're at the bottom end, it's the full 6,000 or 7,000, depending on your age. And if you're somewhere in between, just think about it as a linear sliding scale, somewhere between 0 and 6,000 or 7,000, depending on your age. And then finally, married filing joint, if your modified adjusted gross income is greater than or equal to $208,000, you flat out can't put, neither you nor your spouse can directly contribute money into a Roth IRA by way of the front door. You are phased out. Your income's too high. You cannot directly contribute. And then if you're single, same story, but different limits. You know, it's still, if you're under 50, you can do a 6,000 contribution at most. If you're 50 or older, it's 7,000. But the income limits around which you start to get phased out from being able to make that direct contribution are smaller for single. And here they are. So what is Maggie, or modified adjusted gross income? Just looking at comments here. Okay. For the vast majority of people, and there's different Maggies. I call it Maggie. Some say Magi, whatever. It's whatever you want to call it. It's an acronym MAGI. Again, modified adjusted gross income. I did a YouTube video on it about 6 different Maggies. There's not a single definition of Maggie. There are about a dozen that I'm aware of different Maggies used throughout the tax code for different things. They're all basically start with your adjusted gross income straight off your tax return, and then tweak it by adding or subtracting different things. For Roth IRA contribution eligibility, this is the Maggie for that. It starts with your actual. Don't worry too much about this. I mean, you can play around with this, look at your own tax return and figure this out. But for most people, it's just simply going to be your adjusted gross income. So this changes year by year. The Form 1040 that you use through your tax return, the lines, the ordering changes a bit year by year. So don't get too hung up on this. I forget what this year was. That this may have been. This is 2020. Your adjusted gross income was on line 11. So we're talking about Maggie, modified adjusted gross income. Specifically, the definition of Maggie used for this is different than the definition of Maggie used for anything else. As I mentioned before, I think it may get cut off around here. There are about a dozen different definitions of Maggie, M-A-G-I, or modified adjusted gross income, used throughout the tax code, or at least a dozen I'm aware of. There may be other more obscure parts of the tax code that we don't often see that have their own version of Maggie. But anyway, for Roth IRA contribution eligibility, this is the definition of modified adjusted gross income you would use. And for what it's worth, people have asked this question before. If you're looking at your tax return, you will not see Maggie spelled out. It's not its own line on the tax return. Depending what software you use, it may calculate as a supplement, as an addendum, if you will, to the tax return, something that calculates out your Roth IRA contribution eligibility Maggie, but you won't see it on the 1040 itself or any of the formal schedules that get filed with your tax return. It's purely like a supplemental informational thing kind of done off on the side. But this is how you calculate it. You start with your adjusted gross income right off your tax return. And then this is interesting. This is where I cut off, I think. When you do a Roth conversion, that Roth conversion adds to your adjusted gross income. But Roth conversions alone will not knock you out of eligibility, income eligibility, for purposes of doing Roth contributions. Yeah. So you notice you start with your AGI and then you subtract from it any Roth conversions that you did during the year. So you back those back out. So let's just assume your AGI was $300,000. You did a $100,000 Roth conversion. You would strip that out. So now line 3 here is only going to be $200,000 that we're working with. Then from that, you add back in a handful of other deductions you may have taken. One was if you did get a deduction for any traditional IRA contributions you made, student loan interest deduction, tuition fee deduction, and then a few different foreign-related ones, and qualified savings bonds. So I'll let you read this for yourself. Most people aren't going to have these things, these school-related ones, tuition fees and student loan, maybe if you're in school or have a child, a dependent who is, but otherwise, chances are you're not going to be impacted by many, if not any of these. So you add all this up, and that's your modified adjusted gross income. And just again, for your pleasure, these are the MAGI levels at which your ability to directly contribute to a Roth IRA start to get phased out. If you're married filing a joint return, it's $198,000 for 2021. These do change every year. If you're single, it's $125,000. Then above that, there's a phase out, and then at some point, $208,000 if you're married, $140,000 if you're single. You're completely knocked out of eligibility, such that you cannot directly contribute money into a Roth IRA. Wah, wah, can't do it. So let's now start talking about what the backdoor contribution process is. Okay. So like before, you have a Roth IRA that you want to get money into, and you have cash in your bank or normal brokerage account, after tax money. You can't go straight into the Roth IRA. You now put a traditional IRA in the middle. And what does that do? Well, now you, instead of doing your after-tax contribution straight into your Roth IRA by way of the quote-unquote front door, you can't do that. Now, instead, you make an after-tax contribution into your traditional IRA. Then you turn around and convert that money into your Roth IRA. The end result gets you to the same spot. Potentially, you have cash from a regular bank or brokerage account, gets into your Roth IRA, but it goes through this whole janky process here, which is the proverbial I guess that's not a proverb, the metaphorical backdoor. So this is the process for doing a backdoor Roth IRA contribution. Just to nitpick a little bit, it's not called the backdoor conversion. It's not called a backdoor something else. It's technically a backdoor contribution. Anyone can do a conversion regardless of income or age or whatever. So there's nothing backdoor about doing a conversion. It's just that a conversion is one of the integral parts and necessary parts of the backdoor contribution. Because again, you're taking money from cash or brokerage account, contributing it into your Roth IRA, but doing it by way of the back door, where the back door is this intermediate step of first putting the money into your traditional IRA, then turning around and converting it to your Roth IRA. Make sense? Good. So this is the backdoor Roth IRA contribution process. Not as cumbersome or scary as it may seem, but there are nonetheless things to watch out for. So the big one to watch out for is pro rata rule. We talk about this in the group a lot. So pro rata rule is simply that recall that a traditional IRA, like I said at the beginning, typically has money in it that you got a tax deduction on when you put it in there. That's pre-tax money, it's called. Anyone with earned income can put after-tax money into a traditional IRA. After-tax money just simply means you're not taking a tax deduction in the year you put the money in. You're going ahead and paying tax on that money. So you can mix and commingle pre-tax and post-tax money into a traditional IRA. No problem so far. Where the problem is that anytime you take money out of a traditional IRA, whether it's a straight up distribution or it's a conversion, you can't pick and choose which monies you distribute or convert. You can't, if your IRA is a mix of pre-tax and post-tax money, you can't say, I want to convert just the after-tax money I put in. No. every bit you convert is going to be a kind of blended mix of both the pre-tax and post-tax money. Let's look at a quick example here. So let's assume you already have $95,000, all of pre-tax money in your traditional IRA. And again, by pre-tax, I mean this is contributions you took deductions for and you put in, and or growth thereon. All growth is pre-tax. You never pay tax on it yet. So you have $95,000 of that money. Then you do a $5,000 after-tax contribution, meaning you do not take a deduction for the $5,000 you're contributing. After-tax money is also known as basis, quote-unquote basis. So in total, your traditional IRA is worth $100,000. $95,000 of it's pre-tax, $5,000 is post-tax. Now let's assume you just put that $5,000 in because you're trying to be slick and do this backdoor Roth IRA contribution we just looked at because your income's too high, you're married and it's $300,000 or whatever. So you're like, all right, I'm going to put $5,000 non-deductible after-tax money into my IRA. I'm going to turn around and I'm going to convert $5,000 into my Roth IRA. Bing, bang, boom, everything's cool. Well, no, because of the pro rata rule. So in this example here, 95% of your total IRA balance is pre-tax, 5% is after-tax. That means when you convert $5,000, 95% of it will be taxed. So that's what? $5,000, that's $450 if I did the math right. $5,000 times 0.95, no, $4,750. Yeah, $4,750 of that conversion will be taxable. Only $250 will be a non-taxable conversion of your after-tax money. You may be like, why? I just put in $5,000 after tax. Now when I convert it, why am I paying tax on $4,750 of it? Well, because again, of that $5,000 you converted, it's deemed that 95% of it is a conversion of your pre-tax money, and only 5% is a conversion of your after-tax money. Hence, you're taxed on the 95% of that conversion. That's not cool. So for people that have really large traditional pre-tax traditional IRA balances, doing backdoor Roth IRA contributions may not be smart, because you're going to, not only is the money you put into your Roth already taxed, but then your conversion itself, a good chunk of it may be taxable as well. So in that sense, you're kind of paying double tax in that year, which may not be ideal. Now, it's not double tax for nothing. You know, the portion of the monies you're paying tax on to convert from your IRA, you won't be taxing that money again. So that's the benefit of it, but still, it may not be pleasant to have to pay additional tax on your conversion, especially if you're already in a high bracket. Now, there are ways around this. Well, the only way I'm aware of is if you work for an employer and have an employer-sponsored retirement plan like 401k, Federal Thrift Savings Plan, 403b, 457, and those plans allow you to roll money in from an IRA, then what you can do is you can basically take the $95,000 of pre-tax money in your IRA, you can roll that into your employer plan, so that now only the $5,000 of after-tax money is left. Then when you convert that, that's all you're going to be, you won't be taxed on any of that, because all of that will be already taxed money from your contribution. Make sense? Some of you may have heard me say this before or heard it on other podcasts and things, but the best way to think about pro rata is cream and coffee. So let's assume let's go back to this example. So you have $95,000 of pre-tax money in your IRA, and that's it so far. Picture that as a cup of black coffee. Now you take $5,000 of after-tax money and you put it into that pot, put it into that IRA, put it into that cup. Once that white milk or cream, that's what this $5,000 after-tax money is. Once that cream or milk mixes with that black coffee, you can't separate them out. Now it's like this blended light brown mocha-ish color, such that every sip you take, every spoon you take out, is going to be a mix of some of the black coffee and a mix of some of the cream, all swirled up. You can't just sift them out and separate it. Like if you were to take out a spoonful, you can't spoon out just the cream at that point or just the black coffee. It's inextricably mixed. Think about that. That's the pro rata rule, right? Every bit you take out is going to be largely black coffee with a little bit of cream swirled in it, mixed in it. That's pro rata. that one way around it, like I said, if you have an employer plan, that is the one sort of magical fix that can actually filter out the black coffee from the cream. Because employer plans, if they do allow you to roll in monies from IRAs, they are not allowed to take in after-tax money. They can only roll in pre-tax money. So that's the way you can sort of sift out and break apart. You roll in 95 of your IRA. That's all going to be just the pre-tax money. That leaves the $5,000 of after-tax money in your IRA. You no longer have a pro rata rule problem because you only have $5,000, all of which is after tax. If you convert that to your Roth, none of that's taxable. The other thing to watch out for here is it's your IRA balances as of December 31st of the year of the conversion that matter. This gets a little technical. You'd have to look at Form 8606. This is what actually does the calculation. This is the formal attachment to your tax return that does this math. It'll say right on there, you have to add up the value of all your IRAs, not just your regular IRAs, but also your SEP, SEP IRAs and simple IRAs. If you have those are kind of self-employment or small employer plans. You have to add up the balances of all of those as of December 31st. So if you're going to do this, breaking apart the cream and the coffee thing by rolling your IRA into an employer plan, do it by December 31st, because those are the balances that matter. So long as your IRA is cleaned out by December 31st, you're good. You won't have pro rata to worry about. But let's say it's June, you want to do this backdoor Roth thing, but you have a lot of pre-tax money in your IRA. You don't want to get dinged with pro rata. So you in our example, you roll 95 grand today from your IRA into your 401k. You now have 5,000 left in your IRA. You think, cool, all this is just the after-tax money. Let me convert this today to my Roth. None of it's taxable. So you go ahead and do the conversion. And then a month later, some point in July, you then roll that 95 back out of your 401k into your IRA. You think you're good because you did it after this conversion. Well, no, you're not good because it's December 31st IRA balances that matter. Keep that in mind. All right, let me pause there. I don't have much else to say. Obviously, I got one more slide here. Yeah, so let me just check comments quickly and get a drink while I'm at it. All right, so we have some questions / comments. I will get to them in a moment. I only have a few more minutes of blowing hot air here, and then I'll move on. Tonight's topic is relatively succinct. So the other thing that you used to have to watch out for, and depending who you ask, you may still have to watch out for, but I'm not of the opinion that you do. Neither are the majority of the industry, including folks like Ed Slott, who's probably the most trustworthy and reliable and knowledgeable source on this outside of the IRS, is the step transaction doctrine, otherwise known as the step doctrine rule. It basically says this. You may have two individual actions that are on their own permitted, but when you string them together, they can be viewed or construed as a single action. And if that single action happens to be unpermitted, you may have a problem. Backdoor Roth IRA contributions were historically viewed as potentially subject to this. Now, what do I mean by that? So let's go back to this, the backdoor contribution. So these are two parts. So when you do a regular IRA contribution, it's just one step. You take money, you put it to your Roth IRA, one step, right? When you do a backdoor, it's two steps. Each step is independently fine and completely kosher. So anyone, as long as you have earned income, it doesn't matter how high your income is, but so long as you have earned income, you can take money from your bank, brokerage account, cash, whatever. You can put it into a traditional IRA. This is step one. There's nothing wrong with that. That is outright allowed by the IRS. Step two, anyone can do a conversion, regardless of your age, your income, whatever. Anyone can convert. So each of these two steps independently, completely fine, no issues. But step transaction doctrine says when viewed as a whole, these two things could be construed as if you're functionally and practically doing one step, meaning you're doing this just to skirt around the fact that you can't directly contribute to a Roth. So effectively we're viewing this as one transaction only, which is ultimately you doing a Roth contribution. And if your income's too high, mind you, you can't do it. So I went too far. Anyway, I'll keep this up. So the step transaction doctrine says that each step independently is fine, but when strung back to back, they're now potentially viewed as one step, and that step's not fine. That used to be the case. So now a few years ago, and I'll explain why a few years ago matters, there are different schools of thought. Now, the IRS never really cracked down on this, thankfully. It was always something that was known that this could be a problem. They may invoke the step transaction doctrine on people and slap them after the fact and be like, nope, I see what you did here. You basically did a Roth contribution you weren't allowed, so we're going to ding you for it and consider it an excess contribution. People's way around that was that, okay, let's put some time between these two transactions, these two steps. So when you do your non-deductible traditional IRA contribution, fine, do it. Now wait a period of time. This is where the opinions were all over the place. Some people said wait 30 days. Some people said wait until you get that month's statement. Some people said wait a quarter. Some people said wait at least a year. And then after you wait, then you can do your conversion to the Roth. The thought was that by making these, far apart enough time-wise, the IRS isn't going to try to come and say, hey, you functionally did that as one transaction, as if it was a straightaway Roth contribution. No, shame on you. We can see you let it sit, you let it simmer. It's two separate distinct transactions, each of which are okay, so we'll let it be. That was the concern. That's why people would wait. But in 2017, as part of a congressional, I don't know if it was hearing or what the proper term is, or the gripe session, I don't know, Congress put out a report where one of the notes of the report were this, and I'm quoting, this is straight from the report here, House of Representative Conference Report 115-466 from December 15, 2017. Footnote 269 said, although an individual with AGI exceeding certain limits is not permitted to make a contribution directly to a Roth IRA, the individual can make a contribution to a traditional IRA and convert the traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. Boom. That's as smoking gun as you're going to get. Oh, I take that back. So the vast majority of the industry, like Ed Slott and others, now are of the opinion, this is it. This is the blessing. This is the government saying, yes, it's okay. You can do a non-deductible traditional IRA contribution, immediately convert it to a Roth IRA, and it's good. You don't have to worry about the step transaction doctrine potentially making it look like you violated Roth contribution rules. Some folks still don't buy it, like Michael Kitces, for example. He's one of the thought leaders and most respected in the financial planning industry. I think he's way off. He's way too conservative. Now, to be fair, the IRS hasn't explicitly given formal guidance as yes, it's okay. This is, I don't remember which congressperson said it, but this is from a congressional person. Now, for what it's worth, it's Congress who makes the laws. So, I think that's the public and my own satisfaction that this is all blessed now because Congress themselves said it's okay. So, I have to give a disclaimer. Again, it's not formal IRS guidance saying it's okay. It's just congressional wording from 3.5 years ago at this point. But like I said, the step transaction doctrine, to my knowledge, was never enforced, or at least not widely prior to this. People did backdoor Roth contributions all the time. To my knowledge, there weren't widespread issues or getting in trouble. This really, ever since then, I'm not aware of any cases of the IRS claiming or invoking the step transaction doctrine. So I don't feel you need to worry about it. But again, do it at your own risk, at your own discretion, because it is not formally blessed by the IRS yet, but it does appear to be blessed by Congress for what it's worth. Alrighty. That's it for the slides. Let me now go to comments and questions. David, let me get off my screen share here. Okay. David Folts, why does the government limit annual Roth contributions but not Roth conversions or backdoor amounts? Yeah, great question. I don't know. So not exactly what you asked, but I don't know why Roth contribution and IRA contribution amounts aren't the same as 401k, 403b, TSP amounts, right? It's $19,500 if you're under 50 for an employer plan. It's only $6,000 if it's a Roth or traditional IRA. which is silly. So I don't have a good answer for that. Why do they? That aside, even if they did allow larger Roth or traditional IRA contributions, why do they allow limitless conversions and not limitless contributions? I really don't know. I would like to think there's some reason to it, but I'm not sure. Now, I'm just thinking out loud. I mean, the government likes getting money sooner rather than later. That's why they're okay with you doing large conversions, because that's you paying tax now as opposed to tax in the future. But that also would build a case for why wouldn't they allow larger contribution amounts in the first place. Yeah, I don't really know, Dave Folts. Good one. Yeah, good old pro rata rule. Nothing good about it. Okay. Interesting. Indeed. Other comments here. Sound stopped a few minutes. Oh, that's not cool. Hopefully you can hear it now. Oh, never mind. Sound is good for me. Cool. Wow, who knew you can do inverse order? Not intuitive, but good to know. Rolling an IRA into employer plan after the backdoor conversion. Yes. Now, whoever this is, yes. The way Form 8606 works, that's correct. You can do, going back to our example, you have a $100,000 IRA today, 95 of it's pre-tax, 5 of it is post-tax. In theory, you can do a $5,000 conversion today and then roll over the other 95 some point between now and the end of the year, so long as by December 31st it's empty. Now that will work on paper, and I'm sure lots of people do that. Actually, I know someone who did do it and it was fine. I personally would still like to follow the logical order. If it was me, I would first do the reverse rollover of the traditional pre-tax money into the employer plan, and then do the 5,000 conversion. Again, technically it doesn't matter. But for whatever reason, I just feel more comfortable doing it in the proper order. But yes, you can do it backwards if you wanted to. I don't see anything in 8606 or other parts of tax returns that would lead me to believe otherwise. Is it better to convert your traditional IRA into Roth IRA prior to retirement so you don't have to pay higher Medicare payments? That all depends. I mean, I'm doing something in a month or so in one of these lives about when to consider Roth conversions. So the answer is always going to be it depends. But yes, Medicare surcharges known as IRMA, IRMAA, are one thing to keep in mind because conversions do increase your AGI. Your AGI is what's used to, another version of modified AGI is what's used to determine if your Medicare surcharges are applicable to you. So all else equal, correct. If you can do it before you're 63, because it's from when you're 63 onward that your income starts to matter for Medicare premiums when you're 65 or older. If you can do it before then, great. But if not, like maybe you're working up until you're 65 and you have really high wages up until then no, then maybe you do want to wait until you're 65, then start doing your conversions if conversions make sense for you. But you will need to be aware of how your conversions are going to impact your AGI, which is potentially going to impact your Medicare premiums. Good observation. Yeah, I don't know. So Jeff Levine is another well-respected kind of tax nerd in the industry who works with Michael Kitces now and has for about a year. I'm not sure what Levine's take is, honestly. Good question. If anyone's interested in looking that up, let me know. Or I might do it after the fact. But still, I think, I don't want to say Levine's opinion doesn't matter because it does. I generally do respect him a lot and his knowledge and his view on things. But I just, Ed Slott, for what it's worth, he's probably the most, of all non-IRS folks, Ed Slott and Natalie Choate, Choate, are probably the two most reliable, most trustworthy, the ones that you should lean on the most. So if Ed Slott differs from Michael Kitces when it comes to taxes and IRAs, I'm always going to go with Ed Slott any day of the week. For lots of other things, Michael Kitces and Jeff Levine are sort of the go-tos, but I would still lean towards what Ed Slott says. So I don't know Jeff Levine's thought, but yeah, good question. Can you roll an IRA into a 457? I don't know. I guess possibly, like it may be up to the plan, the district you work for, the government you work for, or whatever, and ask them. Like with 401ks, there's nothing there's nothing the IRS says you can't, but each plan is allowed to set restrictions, and they may not allow IRAs to be rolled in. If 457s work like that, then maybe you can, and it's up to your plan. But it's possible, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud, 457s might be flat out restricted as per IRS stipulations from taking in IRA money. Simple answer would be ask your plan and see what they say. Oh, look at this, Cody Garrett. Jeff Levine wrote an article in Forbes in 2018 stating the case is closed. Okay, good. So I guess that solves it. So Jeff Levine, again, who is Michael Kitzis's tax guy, apparently has said that the step doctrine rule is done, and looks like you can, just looking at the title here, yeah, it looks like you can safely do this. So I would assume he's citing the same congressional report that I'm citing here, because this was kind of like the closest thing to a smoking gun that put the nail in the coffin for that step transaction doctrine as it relates to backdoor Roth IRA contributions. All right. Any other questions or comments? Otherwise, I mean, I'm done here. I got nothing else to talk about with these backdoor Roth IRA stuff. I'll take whatever kind of random thoughts or questions y'all have now. So I'll stick around for another few minutes. Otherwise, we'll wrap it there. Next week's topic's going to be a good one. These are all good ones. Who am I kidding? But no, next week's going to be special guest Roger Whitney, of the Retirement Answer Man podcast, founder of the Rock Retirement Club. He will be on talking about steps to take as you near retirement. So for those of you who are familiar with Roger and his work, he more so than other folks focuses on kind of the softer side of retirement, the meaning, the purpose, the finding satisfaction and fulfillment in retirement. That's kind of where he stands out. He's a sharp financial dude too, but softer side is kind of his where he really adds a lot of value. So anyway, so I'm assuming next week's topic, things to do, steps to take as you get in your retirement, may be a lot about the softer side of things, which is really cool. So I'm sure you'll all get a lot out of it. Facebook user, our 401k is subject to the pro rata rule. Good question. So let me answer this two ways. So first, when it comes to if you mean pro rata rule for purposes of doing a backdoor Roth IRA contribution, no. It's only the value of your IRAs that matter for pro rata, which is why getting money into your 401k kind of fixes the IRA pro rata problem. Whatever's in your 401k does not mingle with the IRA for purposes of pro rata. Now, within your 401k, so let's assume you have pre-tax money and post-tax money in your 401k. You want to convert some of it to Roth. Is there a pro rata? I think it depends on plan, because I know I haven't seen it myself, but I know of people who said that their 401ks allow them to make after-tax contributions and then immediately convert that after-tax money into the Roth portion of their 401k. And it converts just that after-tax money. It doesn't make them mix and mingle and prorate the after-tax money to pre-tax. So assuming that's accurate, no, it is possible to avoid pro rata within 401k plans. Now, there may be plans that don't allow you to cherry pick the money, and they may make pro rata apply. I don't know. I just, talking out loud, I think you'd have to ask the plan and see what they do. Can you explain the reporting of the backdoor IRA, Form 8606, etc.? I guess so. Hold on. Let me pull up Form 8606. I'm going on Google now. I'll do this quickly. Those of you who are interested. Apparently Cody Garrett's interested. All right. Let me do my screen share. Get rid of Cody's comments first. So for those of you still sticking around, wanting to see Form 8606, got a little something for you. Here we are. Let me just zoom this in. Alrighty, so this is the form. I won't go through all of it, but the gist is, let me focus your attention on, where is it, line 6, I think? Line 6. Enter the value of all your traditional SEP and simple IRAs as of December 31st, 2020. This was last year's form, so it says 2020, plus any outstanding rollovers. Now, this is if you're rolling over to another IRA and it hasn't yet landed in that other IRA. I don't know if this would count rollovers to 401ks if it's in transit. To avoid that, simply don't do a rollover that late in the year. do it beforehand to make sure it's in by December 31st. But so anyway, so this is where you add up the value of all of your traditional IRAs. Here's where you enter the amount you converted. And then this is where you're now adding together, amongst other things, basically the sum of all your IRAs that we just looked at here, plus the amount you converted during the year. This is that total. Now you have to divide lines 5 by 9. Long story short, 5 is just simply the sum of your basis or after-tax money in your IRAs, and 9 is that total number we just looked at. Again, 9 is going to be the value of all your IRAs at December end plus the value of any conversions you did. So this is going to be a prorata figure right here. In our example, if we had $95,000 pre-tax money, did a $5,000 conversion. This is basically not basically, but this will say 0.95% is our pro rata figure. Then when you look at how much of your conversion was taxable, now you got to go down to a different part of the form. Anyway, it'll say here, this is going to say you have a 90, and what was our example? So we did a $5,000 conversion, 4,750 of it was taxable. And again, that was just taking that pro rata figure that we calculated here of 0.95% and multiplied it by our total balances as of the year end, inclusive of the conversion amount that we did. Good. There's more to 8606 than this, but those are the lines involved in what we're just looking at. And then for what it's worth, when you take a distribution from a Roth IRA, this is what calculates the tax or penalty, if any. For those of you who are interested, in case you've never actually done a Roth IRA distribution, you would need to do Form 8606 when you do it to calculate tax or penalty, if there is any due. All right, other questions? I have yet to find the purpose of work. Not sure. Yeah. Good one. So Cannon has yet to find the purpose of work. Not sure he is going to find purpose in retirement. But yes, it is important. Definitely watch next week, Cannon. You probably picked up on these other things we've done with like Kevin Lyles, who's in the Rock Retirement Club. It's important to have purpose and meaning and satisfaction and fulfillment and social connection and et cetera in retirement, because it can be lonely, dangerous, depressing place if not from stories I've heard. Ooh, look at this. Look, what a coincidence. Teresa Wood. Cody's asking about the 8606 for us, not him. Please say a sentence about part 3, Roth distributions, especially Roth basis. All right, let me bring back the screen share here. Part 3. So let me walk through this. Now, what am I trying to say? Okay. So recall that there's oh, sorry, I didn't turn my share on. There we go. Let me get rid of this so people can see. Get rid of that. So non-qualified distributions are those. This is kind of a pain because you do have to look into the instructions for 8606 to find out what is a non-qualified distribution. So this doesn't directly track or do the math for like the 5-year rules and things like that, Teresa. Unfortunately, you need to read this in conjunction with the instructions to 8606, which are in turn going to refer you to publication 590-B. That's what actually spells out the rules for, the 5-year rules around Roths and conversions and blah, blah, blah. So parsing through all that junk will tell you how much of your total distribution is non-qualified. So what's going to happen is if you do a Roth distribution of $50,000 this year, you're going to get a 1099-R from your custodian. Depending on your age and stuff, it's going to be coded. It may just say normal distribution, no known exceptions or something like that. It's then on you to figure out how much of it is non-qualified. That's where you got to dig through publication 890-B, figure out the 5-year rules, when you open an account, blah, blah, blah. And back into how much of it was, you took it out prematurely. That would be a non-qualified distribution. So you put that in here. If you did have, you could take out up to $10,000 in your lifetime for a qualified home buyer expense. After adjusting that, this is now your distribution. Now you would figure out your basis. These were your contributions. So of your 50,000 distribution, let's assume 40 of it was contributions. So that's your basis. Then you subtract your basis, the 40,000 of basis / contributions from the 50,000 distribution. This is now going to be 10,000. If you did conversions, now you got to worry about that. Let's assume we didn't. So now you're coming down to $10,000 of non-qualified distribution. This is now where this is what you're going to be taxed on. Where's the 10% penalty come into play? I'm just looking. That's actually a separate form. So that's going to be 8329, 5329. I know there's a 3, a 2, and a 9 in there. But whatever form I'm thinking of, that's the one that calculates the penalties, the excise penalties. This form will just calculate the tax. So in our example, you took out 50 grand from your Roth IRA, 40,000 of it was return of your contributions, 10,000 of it is an early premature. Let's say you're only 58, you're younger than 59 and a half. So 10,000 of it's going to be taxable. So that's going to be here. This will say $10,000. This now will flow into your 1040 and be included in your taxable income. Again, of your 50 total distribution, only 10 of it is going to be taxable. Where's the 10%? Yeah, so now I think it's 8329, 5329. Let me pull this up while we're at it. Form, just so I can show you 8329. Oh, that's not it. Never mind. That's something else. 5329. Yes, 5329. Here we go. Okay. Can you all see this? Yes, you can. So now, in addition to figuring out that you have $10,000 of taxable distribution, Teresa, this is the form you would use to add the 10%. Let me see what section it is. Excess contribution. Contribution. No, I guess it's just this. I think this is it. Yeah. So now, again, it's going to reference you to the instructions for Form 5329, but basically you would add in your $10,000 early non-qualified distribution that you took from your Roth IRA. This is going to be $10,000. Now, boom, here you go. Simply, you have 10% of that is your penalty. So in addition to paying tax on the $10,000, you're going to have a $1,000, the 10% early withdrawal penalty on your Roth IRA distribution, Teresa. Make sense? I know I kind of flew through these, and these forms have a lot of numbers and spaces, so they're confusing to look at, but hopefully this answered the question, Teresa, or at least gave you some visualization of kind of what these things look like if and when you do have to start making these distributions. Okay, kill my screen share. If taking out RMDs from an inherited Roth, you still need to fill out Form 8606. Possibly. So this is where it gets confusing. Generally speaking, any distributions you take from an inherited Roth IRA are not going to be taxable unless the person who died did not have his or her first Roth IRA for at least 5 years. In that case, you as the beneficiary need to round out that 5 years. For example, person opened a Roth IRA 3 years ago. They died today. You need to hold that Roth IRA for 2 more years before you can take out any earnings within that account tax-free. Any contributions, the decedent, the person who passed made, those you can take out, but you can't take out earnings until 5 years have elapsed from when the decedent opened his or her first Roth IRA. If you do, there will be a 10% penalty. No, I'm sorry, tax. There's no penalty. The penalty is waived. You as an inheritor, as a beneficiary, the 10% penalty is gone, period. But you would owe earnings on the removal. You would owe tax on the removal of earnings if if you have not yet met that 5-year period, inclusive of the time that the decedent had his or her first Roth IRA. Now, practically speaking, how is the IRS or anyone going to know this? I don't know. I don't know that it's really feasible for you to know when the decedent opened his or her first Roth IRA. I mean, I guess you can say it's the executor's responsibility to figure that out. And the executor would need to backtrack through custodians to find out when the decedent opened the Roth IRA. But in practice, in reality, I would assume even if you are subject to the penalty, to the tax, because it's less than 5 years, you're probably not going to know it. So you're probably not going to report this distribution. So you're not going to, because you don't report it, because you're therefore not going to know whether or not you owe tax on it. And my guess is the IRS is going to be none the wiser. That's just my guess. I mean, that's not the official answer. The official answer is you may still owe tax on it. So you would still need to technically report it. But good luck getting to the bottom of, whether or not the decedent actually had an IRA for 5 years. Okay, hopefully that was kind of a rambling answer, but I hope that made some sense. And finally, Dave Meyers. If you inherit a traditional IRA, make sure to find out if there's any basis. The custodian doesn't know. The executor probably doesn't know. You need to look at the historical tax return of the decedent. Yeah, another complex, difficult thing about inheriting accounts. So when you inherit a traditional IRA, if the decedent, the person who died, had after-tax money in it, when you remove that after-tax money, you want to pay tax on it. When you remove anything else from the IRA, you will. Pro rata will come into play. So let's say the person died with $100,000 in his or her IRA. 80,000 of it was pre-tax, 20,000 was post-tax. When you inherit that IRA, when you take distributions, only 80% of every distribution will be taxable. The other 20% will be non-taxable because it's deemed a return of contribution. The decedent's contribution. But unless you know with certainty what the decedent's basis was, you're not going to be able to figure this out. And good luck getting it. Like Dave Meyers points out, the right answer is custodian doesn't know. Custodian has no idea what's basis, what's not. That's purely something between you and the IRS as reported on your tax returns. So unless unless you get the decedent's most recent tax return and hope he or she have been diligent throughout all their years and actually tracking the basis on Form 8606 is where basis is tracked, you're never going to know. Worst case, that just simply means you're going to end up paying tax on all of the distributions from the inherited IRA when in reality you should have been paying tax on something less than all of it. But that may be a real difficult one to get squared away if you don't have good records, good tax return from the decedent. All right. I will just anything else I miss here? Does not look like it. Okay, I will end it there then. That's it for the comments. So again, next week, Roger Whitney. The week after that, I will be away. So no Taxes and Retirement Live. That'll be my first vacation other than the 2-week break I took at the end of last year. So that's that. Hope you enjoy this and take care. I will see you next week.